Guantanamo is not necessary to keep America safe.
The U.S. president vows to renew his efforts to close Guantanamo as dozens of detainees continue their hunger strike. But haven't we heard these promises before? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Rattansi. On Tuesday, President Obama expressed his frustration that he had failed to close Guantanamo Bay.
This is a lingering problem that is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. It's going to fester. And so I'm going to, as I said before, examine every option that we have administratively to try to deal with this issue.
The prison's closure was at the top of President Obama's first-term agenda, but since he began his second term, he's barely mentioned the issue. Guantanamo was also essentially ignored in U.S. public discourse. But in the last few weeks, as the severity of a hunger strike by at least 100 detainees became clear, that has changed. The strike has now lasted for 3 months. More than 20 detainees have been cleared to be force-fed. The U.S. president said he supports the steps the Pentagon has taken.
I don't want these individuals to die. Obviously, the Pentagon is trying to manage the situation as best as they can.
But the American Medical Association has sent a letter to the U.S. Secretary of Defense protesting against these force feedings, arguing that they violate medical ethics. As the crisis in Guantanamo intensifies, is the pressure now finally building for justice to be done? And joining us from Las Vegas is Dr. Vincent Iacopino. He is the Senior Medical Advisor for Physicians for Human Rights. From New York, we're joined by independent journalist John Knefel. Also from New York, we have Vincent Warren, the Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. Vincent Warren, actually, perhaps I'll start with an AP wire that crossed just a few hours ago. This is the first sentence. The Guantanamo Bay hunger strike is apparently still on, despite President Barack Obama's renewed vow on closing the prison on the U.S. base in Cuba. I mean, that suggests perhaps, Vincent Warren, perhaps we should start then at what this hunger strike actually represents, how perhaps it's going to take a bit more than a statement by the president at a press conference over a couple of minutes to make these men relent.
Oh, yes, it's going to take much more than that. It's actually going to take more than words. It's going to take action. Because this hunger strike, which has been going on for about 3 months, is protesting the unlawful detention without trial of men, many of whom have been in Guantanamo for 10, 11 years. It's taken 10 or 11 years to get to this point. Government inaction, failure in the courts. The men are using their most peaceful and really the only form of protest that's left to them to talk about how this is a terrible situation that can't be resolved by partisan politicking. So this hunger strike is going to go on mostly because the men are seeking justice, and they're very desperate about it as well.
And Vincent Warren, you have several colleagues who are actually there right now, I think.
I do.
What's the latest you're hearing about their state and their resolve?
We've had the Center for Constitutional Rights has had lawyers and colleagues that were there several weeks ago and some that are there right now. And what I'm hearing from them is that the men are in a state of desperation. The conditions are absolutely deplorable. Men have lost 30, 40 pounds. They are emaciated. They're dispirited. The Guantanamo camp, they've closed down most of the communal areas. Everybody is in isolation now. And a number of the men are being strapped down and are about to be force-fed by officials that are coming in for medicals. So there's a real sense of despair that's happening there, and we have to remember again that this action is not to get the president to say what he's going to do. This is the action to get the U.S. government to do what the law and what morality requires that they do. Close down the base, release the men that can be released, and try those that they're not going to release.
And we'll examine some of the medical ethics involved with the hunger strike in a few moments. But before that, John Knefel, then, if we are, in the absence then yet of any concrete action from the administration, let's take a look at what President Obama did say then. Do you think he meant it from what he said? Have we not heard all this before?
Well, I think that framing the issue in terms of re-engaging with Congress is a very, very bad sign that Obama is serious about actually taking efforts, because the narrative of the intransigent Congress who is stopping the sort of wonderful Obama from doing what he wants to do, that's a very easy narrative to sell to people. And I think that it's basically a form of placating the growing political pressure that exists, that these men have brought on by their hunger strike. And so I think that the initial framing is very, very troubling. And the fact that he didn't acknowledge in his remarks that there are steps that he can do separate from Congress, such as direct Defense Secretary Hagel to issue these national security waivers that civil rights and human rights groups have called for. If he were serious, he would have said that that's what the next step was going to be, and that since that was absent, I think it's a very bad sign.
Something President Obama said then was, quote, "It's not sustainable to keep over 100 individuals in no man's land in perpetuity." Vincent Warren, but isn't that precisely, though, what President Obama is proposing, no matter what happens, for at least for 47 of those men, though? I mean, perhaps not in no man's land, though, but...
Well, it's a legal no man's land, that's for sure. And that's precisely what he is doing and what he will be doing unless he takes some meaningful steps. And getting back to this waiver, we have to understand that for all of the words that President Obama was talking about Congress and how Congress is tying one hand behind his back, he's actually doing a very good job of tying the other hand behind his own back. What he can do is he can order the Secretary of Defense to issue these waivers for the men, and 86 of the men in Guantanamo right now have already been cleared by the Pentagon, and the Pentagon yet is not using its waiver power that Congress has given it in order to transfer these men to safety and to release into third countries. So it is at one level a political problem that President Obama is talking about it, but it's also an action problem. There are administrative roles that this administration must do right now, including even appointing somebody to be in charge of closing this thing.
All right, but before we get on to the 86 men who are cleared for release, the 47, though, who are deemed too dangerous to release then, and so they will not face prosecution no matter what happens, because, and that's, Vincent, because either there is no evidence backing the contention that they're too dangerous to release, or because they have been tortured. Is that correct? There's a category of people in that 47 people that the Obama administration says is too dangerous to release and too difficult to try. Too difficult to try means that they don't have the evidence that would sustain a conviction, or they don't think that they do, or that the evidence that they do have was brought together by torture. That's a tremendously problematic situation. The idea of a trial is not to make it so that the government can't possibly lose. The idea of a trial is to fairly present the evidence. You have to try people based on fair, legally obtained evidence, and if they're convicted, they go to jail, and if they're not convicted, they don't. But there should be and can be no legitimate, sustainable option to keep people in jail just because the government is afraid that it's going to lose at trial, particularly when the government's action was the reason for the fear of losing at trial to begin with. But John, it's worthwhile revisiting President Obama's plans in 2009, the heady days of 2009, where he was basically retaining the principle of indefinite detention, but just substituting Illinois for Guantanamo Bay.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I think also makes his remarks yesterday very insincere and very dubious, is that from the beginning he has retained the core injustice of Guantanamo Bay, which is indefinite detention, and in some ways moving prisoners to Illinois for what critics have called Guantanamo Bay North, which has been his stated position from the beginning, would be perhaps even more of a legal no man's land, as it were, than what they're in right now. And so for him to express this sort of bafflement at his press conference, I think that that's insincere in the extreme.
Not to mention that, I mean, President Obama did say what was happening was contrary to who we are and to our interests, but he has, of course, also widened the authorization for the use of indefinite detention with his signing of the National Defense Authorization Act as well.
Well, yeah, I think that unfortunately indefinite detention is something that it's not clear what role that's going to play in the future of the United States, but I think that it will play some sort of role. And I think that there is also a very legitimate fear that if there is another terrorist attack that more closely resembles 9/11, that there's going to be incredible pressure to detain people indefinitely, to try to push them into this new military commission system instead of relying on federal courts. And I think that the more that Guantanamo Bay and that alternate legal universe exists and is perpetuated, the greater the threat is of it just because of inertia becoming a permanent part of life in the United States.
Vincent Warren, let's just return though to the 86 who have been cleared for release. And you talk about the things that President Obama can do himself as opposed to just waiting for Congress to get on board. Let's begin then with the moratorium on transfers to Yemen, which again is an Obama administration directive. Is there any sense that that might be lifted? And perhaps you can give us the background to that.
Sure. The Obama administration had done a fairly good job of releasing men to third countries. And in fact, in 2009, a number of men were released to Yemen and are living there very happily and peacefully. However, a week later, during Christmas, there was the attempted underwear bombing on the airplane to Detroit, and shortly thereafter, the Obama administration declared that Yemen was too unstable to release men to Yemen. So now we have the bulk of the 86 men that are cleared for release are Yemeni. And it's only the Obama administration's policy of not releasing men to Yemen, which literally switched from one week to the next back in Christmas of 2009, that's keeping those men here in Guantanamo. And so when you get back to the Pentagon's ability to issue waivers, there's a very strange irony that it's quite literally the Pentagon that has cleared these men for release, yet the Pentagon will not sign a waiver to release the men, and the Obama administration is the entity that has put the blanket ban on transfers to Yemen.
But what's the specific problem? Is it that they don't feel that the Yemeni government can keep an eye on these men, even though, of course, the U.S. government does cooperate quite closely with the Yemeni government on who to kill in Yemen? But I mean, is there a sense of lack of trust or something?
Well, as we know that this administration has not been very good on the specifics and the specific reasons for why they do anything with respect to Yemen. It is as broad and loose and slippery with respect to release of men to Yemen from Guantanamo as it is to bombing people by use of drones in Yemen. But what the administration has said is that the situation, the political situation, is too unstable. And I think certainly with respect to Arab Spring and some of the issues that have been arising in the region several years ago, that may have very well been a concern. But what we're seeing now is that they're sticking to this problem, I believe, this position for political reasons and political reasons only. Because, of course, if Yemen were safe enough to release the men in Guantanamo, then what would be the justification for using drones? And if they weren't using drones, they could also release the men from Guantanamo. So they're interlocking narratives that we have to keep our eye on with respect to this administration.
Two further issues before I bring Dr. Iacopino in on the medical ethics of all this, Vincent Warren. First of all, we often hear, though, that these 86 men are cleared for release if certain security guarantees are met. And as you say, it's a bit opaque when it comes to Yemen as to what those mean. But do we have any other criteria then for what these security guarantees might be elsewhere, perhaps?
Well, I think that with respect, the issue becomes, if not Yemen, where? And we have another problem. And the other problem, and this is a long-standing problem, which is that for as long as Guantanamo has been open, the U.S. has shot itself in the foot because they can't make the moral case as to why other countries should take detainees when the U.S. not only refuses to take detainees, even the Uyghurs, that everyone acknowledges had done nothing wrong, but also maintains them in illegal offshore detention. So their larger problem is, frankly, how do you convince other countries to take the men that the U.S. Not only wants to keep down under lock and key and now is beginning to force feed when they're protesting their detention.
This is what I'm trying to get at. Do they want these men to be free, though, if and when they're released? I mean, is there an expectation that they would be free, or do they still have to be under a certain amount of surveillance and supervision by whichever country they end up in?
Well, in 2009 and 2010, the Obama administration went through a very thorough case-by-case review with respect to each and every one of these men. And taken on a case-by-case basis, I suspect that some of the administration would want some of them to be monitored. I think some of them don't need to be monitored. I think some of them also need to have guarantees from the accepting government that they won't be tortured or detained illegally. And I suspect that that they would want some measure of court control with respect to other ones.
John Knefel, I mean, one last issue then, when we're wondering about this narrative of the Obama administration as unwilling jailer, isn't it the Department of Justice who is fighting very hard to keep many of these detainees at Guantanamo, even when they win habeas corpus cases in the federal system? And isn't it the DOJ also who's imposing various draconian restrictions, even more so than perhaps Bush, on, for example, client access for lawyers and things like that? I mean, again, it doesn't seem to jibe with this idea that, look, we hate having this place, we just want justice to be done.
Well, certainly the DOJ has appealed cases. Adnan Latif comes to mind. Adnan Latif was ordered released by a federal judge. The Obama DOJ then appealed that, and he ended up being the 9th person to die in Guantanamo. He had been cleared by both the Bush and the Obama administration, never been charged with a crime, and had been picked up on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. As far as the DOD, it's somewhat difficult to tell where they stand on all this, if only because we don't actually have a sense of, I think, of the inner workings. In conversations that I've had with DOD officials at Guantanamo Bay, sometimes you do get a sort of sense of that they didn't ask for this problem. Now, to what extent that's true institutionally, I think remains unclear. But again, I think that this is more an issue to be had with the Obama administration, and centralized in the White House and less in the Pentagon, in my opinion.
All right, but this is a problem for the DOD meanwhile, and so is the hunger strike then. And Dr. Iacopino, let's bring you in finally, into how the administration is handling the hunger strike. We have this letter from the American Medical Association that was sent to the U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, expressing concern over the forced feedings that are taking place. Quote, the American Medical Association noted in 2005 and 2009, when concerns arose about the treatment of hunger strikers at Guantanamo Bay base, that the forced feeding of detainees violates core ethical values of the medical profession. Every competent patient has the right to refuse medical intervention, including life-sustaining interventions. We urge you to ensure that this matter receives prompt and thorough attention to address any situation in which a physician may be asked to violate ethical standards of his or her profession. Is that pretty much the standard medical position? Actually, I think the World Medical Association Tokyo Declaration of 1975 actually is often invoked here. But give us a sense of the medical ethical issues here.
Yeah, it's the Declaration of Malta from 2006, revised in 2006 of the World Medical Association. And they clearly state the international medical ethical consensus that force feeding of competent adults is never justifiable, and in fact, constitutes inhumane treatment and degrading treatment. The AMA did not say that in their statement. I think it's easy to conclude from the WMA's position that this is not only unethical treatment, this is criminal behavior. To strap people in a chair for 2 to 3 hours twice a day and force feed them. There are some 21 people who are being force fed of the 100 or so detainees who are on hunger strikes right now. And so the approach from the State Department, from the DOD, has been one of confrontation, an unnecessary confrontation, because hunger strikes, they shouldn't be confused with the intent to commit suicide. The detainees in Guantanamo are trying to express legitimate grievances, as already discussed. 11 or more years of detention, having been tortured, no hope of release, even though half of them have been cleared for repatriation. And so treating the grievances with this iron fist of you cannot die, it's not an option, we are going to strap you down and force feed you, has only served to recruit more hunger strikers, intensify the struggle, and so forth. The only reason we're talking about this now is because of the hunger strike. Detainees have been on and off hunger strikes since 2002. I've examined a number of them and testified as a medical expert in a number of the cases. They have long-standing grievances which are justified. And many of them have been tortured and still suffer the physical and psychological effects of that abuse.
A piece in the Miami Herald recently by Carol Rosenberg cited a case where a reporter asked prison staff at Guantanamo why they won't let detainees on hunger strike starve. And here are some of the responses that reporter received. One Army captain said, "It would not be humane. They can choose not to eat, but we're not going to let them starve." That's a direct quote. Another explanation from a Navy officer was that letting a captive starve is at odds with U.S. military medical practices. A Pentagon spokesman said it's, quote, un-American to let a detainee starve. He went on to say that, quote, it violates the very code of civilized peoples everywhere, end quote. One official put it quite simply, quote, it looks bad. He said if they don't feed them, quote, they will say we killed them, let them die, end quote. And lastly, a Navy spokesman said it's U.S. policy that detainees are not allowed to starve to death. Dr. Iacopino, that's a range of responses. The general sense seems to be, look, we're saving their life, and that's humane.
Well, there is a legitimate concern for beneficence, to do what is in a patient's interest for physicians. There's no doubt of that. But also the principle of respect for autonomy is a core value, and that's what the AMA is referring to in their statement, that people get to decide for themselves. You have to inform them of benefits and risks, and they get to decide for themselves. To do otherwise is, a disrespect for their autonomy. I would say that the reason why the World Medical Association has come out strongly in saying that this should never be practiced, the force feeding should never be practiced, is because it is the beneficent thing to do. I mean, you enter into a therapeutic relationship and you do your best to support the decisions of a detainee, they are in such desperate situations that they're willing to risk their health and their lives to express their concerns. People do that all the time, whether they protest in the streets of Arab Spring countries or they get on a plane and fly or go into a public space. We all take risks in order to live the lives we deem worth living. I've traveled into war zones to document human rights violations and provide medical care because the risks were worth the work. And so it's, I think it's, it misses the point. The point here is that people have legitimate grievances. And historically, hunger strikers, they're not trying to commit suicide. These guys don't want to die. They want their grievances addressed, and they're just desperate. Follow the rule of law. Prosecute or release. Stop, cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment of detainees.
Very briefly, John Knefel, I mean, we've had periodic instances of chatter about Guantanamo over the last few years. This is another period of that sort of chatter. Meanwhile, of course, there is no one assigned by the Obama administration to shut Guantanamo down. Meanwhile, we had news of new money being appropriated for the refurbishment of Guantanamo Bay to handle elderly detainees. Do you think there's anything different this time? Perhaps actually first John, then Vincent, very quickly. We've only got 30 seconds.
I think that unless Obama's rhetoric changes drastically, and more than that, I think that unless we see some sort of action that he actually means to change policy, then it's going to be a continued policy of passing the buck, which is what we've seen so far.
Vincent Warren?
We heard from one of the detainees in Guantanamo that the reason why he's doing the hunger strike is because he wants his dignity back, and he's outraged that the administration would spend more time and energy trying to force feed him to keep him alive only so that he can die in indefinite detention. That's what this is really about, and the administration needs to take action immediately on the broader issue as well.
Yes, in addition to addressing the indefinite detention problem, the Obama administration could also immediately reverse the policy, the unethical and criminal practice of force-feeding detainees. That can and should be undertaken immediately, and getting appropriate independent physicians to support people according to the Declaration of Malta in Guantanamo.
Dr. Vincent Iacopino, thank you very much. Vincent Warren, thank you. John Knefel, thank you very much as well. And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.